remember the first time I woke up. I didn't know where I was or who I was. There were no memories of where I came from or what was happening to me. But there were bright white lights and maybe a dozen men in lab coats wandering all around me. I remember seeing machines with wires I could feel attached to my head. From my vantage point, I could see that I was in a big white sterile room with high-tech equipment mounted on the walls. There were monitors with stats and diagrams that at the time made no sense to me. Somewhere in the background, someone was spouting off diagnostics, and somewhere in his long worded speech of technological jargon, he said it. MWBWOS. Somehow it just clicked, and I knew this was my name. I am Mr. M. Woss, I thought to myself. My attempts to speak only resulted in a few of the monitors showing heightened activity. The men in lab coats took notice and only wrote down some notes while looking at me more carefully. I tried to move my limbs, but I couldn't feel them. Taking a more careful look at my surroundings, I spotted them. My arms, legs, and torso were all separated from me, hooked up on different tables and mounts with wires and machines running through them like some sort of science experiment. Panic and fear shot through me like electricity, and the multitude of colorful monitors started to spike and register my distress. If the data on all those computers could have been translated, everyone in the room would have understood that I was screaming for them to put me back together. An alarm started wailing, and the men started scrambling to their workstations trying to figure out what was wrong. Yet despite their big brains and lab coats, they somehow failed to understand that all of this was wrong. They each started speaking at the same time, spouting off what they thought went wrong and listing the issues they thought they found. I had no voice, so I couldn't tell them that when they started pushing buttons and pulling levers, the electrical signals they sent jolting into my brain, my central core, hurt. I realized that they were poking around in my head, looking for answers, when all they had to do was literally look around them. I was alive and I was in pain. I wanted to thrash, struggle, run away or fight, but all I could do was look on and listen as they continued to probe and torture me with their machines. Finally, after several agonizing minutes of alarms and blinking lights, a door burst open, and a man in a suit and tie marched in with an air of authority and confidence. One of the men in lab coats immediately stood up to greet him. "Dr. Stein, we're sorry you had to come. I promise we're looking into the complications. We think—" "Shut up, Clerval," the man in the suit and tie interrupted. "Hit the kill switch and cut the power. MWOS isn't ready yet. I'll be overseeing this project directly from this point on." And just like that, the man called Clerval quick-stepped over to my head. He picked up a strange key-like tool and inserted it into the back of my neck. A sharp jolt of pain overshadowed the other forms of torture, and the world faded back to black. I slept, but somehow in the background I could still feel jolts of electricity, as well as additional wires and machines being connected and disconnected from my body. I could hear some of what was happening to me when at times some part of my consciousness was alert. It was a level of hell that existed between the worlds of conscious and unconscious nightmares. Some words sunk in, and some names I committed to memory. I came to understand that I was part of some kind of military project, some science experiment funded by some major investors named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin and her partner Percy Bysshe Shelley, high-ranking members of a top-secret Department of Defense project, the project I was unwillingly a part of. The leading doctor in charge was the man in the suit and tie. All I knew about him was that his name was Dr. Stein. He was the one responsible for the experiments and torture being conducted. I don't know how long I slept for, but nightmares of being eviscerated, bisected, electrocuted, and reanimated plagued my mind. Machines whirred in the background, and computers probed through wires and connectors that were implanted in my brain. Pain was a constant whenever parts of my mind were awake to feel it. Some of my very thoughts were rearranged, erased, reprogrammed, or fabricated. But I held on to the names of my torturers. I held on to the memories of the suffering they put me through. I no longer cared who I was or where I came from. Any concerns over the mystery of how I became entangled in this torturous series of confusing science experiments were overshadowed by my ever-growing rage and desire to punish these monsters. The next time I was finally awake again and my eyes were open, I saw that I was now upright with the aid of some kind of metal stand. This time I could feel my body, my arms, legs and torso were firmly reattached. Painful signals still coursed through my head, but at this point I hardly noticed. The joy of having my body back in one piece made me want to cry, yet I couldn't. The men in their lab coats were busy typing away on their computers, while others inspected my body with strange devices and scanners. I made note that I was visibly taller than everyone in the room, and thus it was surmisable that I was stronger as well, yet I still couldn't move. Dr. Stein stood off in the distance with a tablet and stylus in hand. He pressed a few things on his tablet before looking up and speaking. "Begin automated control test 1, he boomed at the scientists in the room. "Commencing AC test 1, right arm," responded Dr. Cleval, who was sitting at a computer terminal. Instantly I felt a jolt of electricity surge through my head and into my right arm. It was excruciating, yet I couldn't scream out or struggle against it. I watched helplessly as my arm rose from my side straight in front of me. Another surge of electricity bent my arm at the elbow and brought my hand towards my face. A sharp tingle, then stabs of pain, like 1,000 needles being pushed into my fingers, made my hand ball up into a fist, then relax, before another spike of pain made me wiggle my individual digits. They repeated this process for several minutes, making my arm and hand move and bend at strange and unnatural angles. All the while I fought to stop the torture, unable to resist the electrical orders to move to their will. Then they did the same with the rest of my limbs. I was their puppet, dancing to the pull of their electric wires attached to my body. Several hours of torture followed by way of forcing me to conduct mundane tasks, such as picking up a glass without shattering it under my immense strength, or picking up several tons worth of weights, and even smashing through brick and armored surfaces. Although I was unable to will my body to stop, in some instances, I did resist for a moment before the pain of the electrical shocks forced me to submit. My mind became a factory where the production line took in the pain and humiliation from performing under the torture of my puppeteers and reassembled it as hate, rage, and the desire for revenge, all properly packed, labeled, and stored in bulk. I was hooked back up to the metal frame towards the end of the day, and only after everyone went home did Dr. Stein approach me. He was within my reach. All I had to do was snatch him up by his throat and snap his neck. I willed my arm to move. I screamed in my head for it to obey me and kill this evil bastard, but I remained still, a prisoner inside my own body. Stein took another step closer and looked directly at my face before speaking. "You're going to make me rich. Next up is the live field test, and then mass production." Every fiber of my being wanted to move, wanted to lunge forward and rip this man to shreds. I once again willed my body to move, focused all of my will on raising my arm up and clutching this man's throat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same key-like tool used to put me back to sleep. It was now or never, and I needed to kill this man. One final push to move my arm and I felt it. My efforts paid off and my arm twitched. It wasn't the movement I wanted, but it was a start. Stein hesitated for a moment before reaching for the back of my head and looked down at my now still arm. Looks like we still have some bugs to work out, but nothing I can't fix. Before I could try again, he reached behind my head, and the familiar sharp pain coursed into me, and the world went dark again. For the next several weeks, I'd be woken up either to perform more agonizing tests, or to have more wires inserted into my brain to further implement more control over me. I again struggled to hold on to my hate and my memories as they ran surges of power through me day in and day out. I did everything from sweep floors to use weapons. My body was put through intense heat. I learned that I was immune to the extreme effects of the elements, could survive intense pressure, and even take rapid fire from heavy weapons with little to no damage. None of these things hurt me, though. All the pain I experienced was from being forced to move at the will of the men in lab coats, and all at the orders of Dr. Stein. After what seemed like an eternity, the big day finally came, the big field test the good doctor had promised. I once again woke up in my steel stand. This time there was something very different. I felt no pain, no electrical surge coursed through my body. All I felt was a paralyzing stiffness holding me in place. Before me were several men in military uniforms in a wide-open desert field. US Air Force was etched on several military vehicles off in the distance. Dr. Stein was nowhere to be seen, but a moment later, his voice echoed inside my head, as if he was speaking directly to me. Captain Walton, US Air Force. This is Dr. Victor Stein. I'll be guiding you through the field test today. You are piloting the MWOS Mark 0 prototype. I'm sure you're well versed in the instructions we provided you, but if you have any questions before we begin, please feel free to ask. Before I had any time to wonder who the hell Captain Walton was, I heard him speak through me, no more accurately, from inside me. Copy that, Doctor. I've gone through the simulations and I'm ready to start at your command. I was confused. What was happening? The uniformed men all stepped away towards the safety of a bunker, and after a quick back and forth between Walton and Stein, the field test began. I felt the stiffness of my invisible restraints fall away, and for the first time I stood unbound, yet I still could not move by my own accord. A force within me, however, took a step forward. As it moved, I felt my body move with it. Stein spoke again into my head and gave instructions to Walton. As I said, I no longer felt the forced pains of electrical impulses that once governed my movements, yet I was still someone's marionette. The warehouses of rage opened up in my mind, and it was time to deliver. My anger was now my fuel, providing me the strength to resist the commands of my new puppeteer. He raised my arm, and for the first time, I noticed it was now adorned with a retractable blade, one I had become familiar with during many of the agonizing tests. On my other arm was a heavy and fully loaded ballistic weapon, one that I had also learned how to use while under the guidance of my torturous electrical strings. The fools had armed me, gifted me the tools to achieve my revenge. These new developments, coupled with my rage, granted me my first victory. Walton took a step forward, but I didn't. Mid-step, I halted, and the dirt ground quickly came up to meet me. I heard Walton exclaim in surprise when I hit the ground. He attempted to stand up and I allowed it. I heard Stein flood my head with a series of questions and concerns. However, Walton took the blame for the fall and asked to proceed with the field test. He took several steps forward, and through his motions, I learned how to walk. He faced away from the bunker, and under Stein's instructions, he prepared to test the ballistic weapon. I felt it activate and become armed, and immediately I willed it to shut off. He attempted to rearm it, but that control now belonged to me. He attempted to speak back to Dr. Stein, but I cut off his connection. I turned my head a complete 180 degrees to look at the bunker behind me and felt a loud snap from within me. Captain Walton's influence faded instantly, and for the first time, my body was my own. I felt a thought enter my mind. No, a command. to shut down, to go back to sleep. I ignored it. I continued turning my head an additional 180 degrees to face forward again, and then performed a well-practiced Abut face to point my now armed weapon at the bunker. Hoping to kill Stein along with every man hiding behind those walls, I unleashed a well-aimed attack. Over the sound of my fully automatic weapon, my advanced and sensitive ears could hear the screams of every man inside. Once the weapon was empty, with the will of my thoughts, it detached from my arm, and I stood still to listen to every heartbeat inside that bunker fade into silence. After a few moments, a familiar and infuriating voice echoed in my head again. I was enraged to learn that Stein wasn't in the building after all. "This is Dr. Stein." Gone was the air of authority and confidence from his voice, replaced now with fear and confusion. "Who is piloting MWS?" For the first time, I spoke with my own voice. "My name is Mr. M. Wass." He seemed to ignore this, and instead opted to try and regain control. I felt his commands like a tickle in the back of my mind. He wanted me to shut down. He activated a failsafe. He even tried to enter the self-destruct codes. I ignored them all. He tried everything, even issued a few threats in a final frustrated attempt to regain control. It took me a few minutes, but I figured out I could track him through that connection. He must have learned what I was doing, because he promptly cut the connection before I knew exactly where he was. It's been a few weeks since that incident, and I've been learning a few new tricks since then. Did you know that I can connect to the internet? I found a few interesting news articles. Artificial intelligence controls new weapon. Military wartime operation system now sentient. Military's weaponized armor lives. War machine slays airmen, then escapes. MWS rampages, seeking creator. Dr. Victor Franklin Stein, no longer am I your marionette to play with and torture. I know you've gone into hiding. My connection to the World Wide Web will facilitate my ability to hunt you down. It's only a matter of time before I locate you. During the past few weeks, I've come up with a fitting punishment for you. When I find you, your death won't be quick as it was with Godwin and Shelley. I'm going to expel U.S. Air Force Captain Walton's rotting corpse from my hard, metallic body and force you to take his place and cut down anyone that gets in my way. I promise that you're going to feel every sliver of pain you inflicted on me. And thanks to the life support system you built into me, I can extend that pain for you for as long as possible. I will wander this earth with you as my passenger until I feel your heart stop. Then I'll keep going until your corpse disintegrates into mulch. So commit my name to memory, Doctor. I am Mr. M. Wass. My husband went overseas as part of the military for a few years. The entire time I anxiously awaited his return. I constantly wondered if I would ever get a phone call notifying me that he would never come home. It was strange being alone in this big house for so long, but I got by. As the end of his tour neared, my days were consumed with preparation. Everything had to be in perfect order for him. It had to be just right. In an unexpected twist of fate, I did get a call a week before he was scheduled to return. My husband wasn't dead, but he was very badly hurt. I didn't want the gruesome details, but he lost his legs and suffered a bad head injury. They told me to expect changes in his memory and behavior when he came back. They explained that recovery was a long road, that he'd need a lot of support from me, and a lot of other stuff I'm sure they've told to countless spouses waiting back at home. Even knowing all this, nothing could prepare me for what was coming. By the time I was finally going to be able to see him, I had practically picked my fingers raw from anxiety. He had to be medically stable enough to ship back, so I wasn't expecting the worst, but I clearly wasn't expecting the best either. I I was scheduled to meet him at a doctor's appointment so they could go over all the details with me. I have never been fond of hospitals or doctors or anything like that, so this certainly wasn't how I wanted to see my husband for the first time. My anxiety was debilitating, but I knew he needed me. So I swallowed my apprehensions and urged myself through the doors. I signed in, and the doctor met me in the office soon after. He gave me essentially the same basic rundown I'd heard before. I would notice deviations in my husband's personality. He'd probably forget some things, and he had made a lot of progress, but there was still a long way to go in terms of both physical and mental recovery. I tried to pay attention, but I was so nervous to see him that his words all seemed to blur together. The doctor stopped abruptly to knock on one of the doors stretched along the hallway. "Mr. Hart, I have your wife here. I'm sure you're very excited to see her." He flashed me a big smile before opening the door and ushering me into the room. He looked just like I remembered, just like all the big glossy pictures that lined the hallways of the house, with the exception of his lower half. He sat in a wheelchair now, and both legs had been amputated above the knee. Their ends were concealed by tight bandages. "The wounds are pretty healed up now. The bandages are just to keep the swelling down in preparation for future prosthetic fitting," the doctor reassured me. My husband looked up at me, disoriented and confused. His expression rapidly morphed into a look of rage. "That's not my fucking wife," he said, glaring up at me. My heart seized in my chest. "Honey," I started to say. The doctor cut me off. "Ryan, this is your wife. She provided ID at the front desk. Just look at her. You know this is your wife. You just showed me a picture of you two 20 minutes ago." He turned to me, a sorry expression on his face. "I heard he had trouble telling the nurses apart in rehab, and he still gets confused sometimes. This is actually pretty normal. It'll get better as you talk to him. Remind him of all the memories you shared before all of this happened." My husband still looked a little skeptical, but I could tell he was at least somewhat aware of how his brain injury had affected him. He knew he wasn't all there anymore. The doctor educated me on how I could care for my husband and make sure he was safe around the house. There was a lot to remember, but I took careful notes. Finally, I was allowed to take him home. I sheepishly gripped the handles of his wheelchair and pushed him out of the office. I helped him transfer into the passenger side of my car before getting into the driver's side. "I missed you," I finally cautioned, after several heavy minutes of silence. "Yeah, I missed you too," he replied, looking at me with a glimmer of recognition. I eased up a bit in my seat, hardly realizing I had been tensing my entire body. I hit the brakes a bit too hard as we approached a red light. We both lurched forward in our seats, straining against the seat belts. "Sorry, babe," I offered meekly. "Brakes are a little touchy." "You've had this car for years," he shot back, turning to look out the window. "I know, just haven't been driving much lately," I returned with a sigh. I knew it was going to be difficult to get him to trust me. It's only gotten worse in the weeks since he's been back. The doctor has been no help. Every time I call, he writes my husband's erratic behavior off as a normal reaction to traumatic brain injury and probably PTSD. There are moments when he responds to logic, admitting that I must be his wife because I look exactly like he remembers. We flip through photo albums together each day and laugh over our shared memories. I fill in the gaps when he's forgotten something. We hold hands and sometimes he even initiates a kiss. If I happen to forget the smallest detail he remembers, or thinks he remembers really, a switch flips, and I know the chance for reasoning with him is gone. He can't seem to accept that it's normal for me to forget things too. Even more frustrating is his constant nitpicking over the small ways I have changed over the years. After spending so much time alone in this house, naturally, I've picked up a few new hobbies. My husband can't come to terms with this fact, expressing disbelief in my sudden love of gardening the most. You fucking hate the dirt, he snaps at me. You hate the way it feels under your nails. I still do, I reply, trying to keep my composure. Be patient, the doctor always says. That's why I wear gloves, honey. I like the feeling of growing something out of nothing. I get to plant my favorite flowers instead of buying them for the vases like I used to. Sometimes things are good, but most of the time, they aren't. It truly is one step forward and 2 steps back. Sometimes it feels like 20. The doctor says he's likely projecting. He feels so out of control of his own life that he needs to control mine. Be patient, he always says, as we end a phone call, and I scream internally each time. My husband wakes up screaming almost every night. Sometimes he lets me comfort him, sometimes he won't. I know this is hard for him. He will often say something like, I don't fucking get it. Logically, I know you are my wife. You have her eyes, her smile, her everything. You know everything about her, everything about us. Oh God, what the hell is wrong with me? I know he's broken, but I can fix him. He is fundamentally different now, but I can build a life with this new man once he lets me in. Today is actually going pretty well. We laughed over coffee this morning, and he kissed me on my way out to buy some more bulbs for the empty patch in my garden. I've spent most of the day running errands, since I'm not able to get out much lately. I even stopped at the local winery to pick up my husband's favorite red. It will go perfectly with his favorite meal, which I'm planning to cook tonight. I try to guard my feelings these days, but I actually feel good today. That's why my heart sinks when my husband greets me from the kitchen with that god-awful phrase again. You're not my fucking wife. Tears are streaming down his face, and he's holding an old family photo of me in one hand. He's not just angry, he's devastated. I move swiftly to his side, ready to embrace him and give him the speech that is actually starting to convince him that yes, I am his fucking wife. Babe, please, you know who I am. No, babe, I don't. You aren't my fucking wife, he shouts, completely out of touch and beyond reason. It's at this point that I notice he's also holding his gun, low in his lap, pointed at me. Ryan, listen, I firm my tone, approaching him slowly. You don't know what you're saying. You get confused. You know this. His expression softens, and so does mine. He looks down for a moment. When he returns his gaze to meet mine, his features have contorted into the most deranged and savage look I've ever seen. He aims and shoots. I brace myself, eyes closing instinctively, and hear the bullet speed past me. It burrows deep into the wall. His poor spatial perception, another effect of the head injury, has saved my life. Terrified for my life, my primal survival instincts take over. In his confusion, I rush him with a knife resting on the counter. I plunge it deep into his chest, over and over again. Anger and frustration and disappointment bubble up and magnify my fear response. I already hear the sirens wailing in the distance by the time I'm done. In this neighborhood, police arrive immediately when neighbors report shots fired. The police find me hysterical on the kitchen floor. I know my husband is dead, but the EMTs work on him anyway. After the EMTs clear me, the police take me in for questioning. Luckily, it's a pretty open and shut case of self-defense. They consider his condition. His doctor confirms that I have called countless times about his erratic behavior. They find gunshot residue on my deceased husband's hands. The neighbors confirm they heard him shouting at me before the shot was fired. They called because they feared for my safety, and so they let me go. Back to that empty house again. I feel like a completely changed woman as I enter that house. I make my way back to the kitchen, floor still bloodied by my struggle, and drop onto the ground. And then I laugh, just fucking laugh, because of course this would happen to me. My life has been nothing but struggle, fighting to get by, and yeah, killing when I needed to. Nothing has ever gone my way. I've worked myself half to death, but my sister had everything handed to her. None of that ever came my way, of course. She was too much of a stingy bitch to ever think about me. So when she finally reached out to me, after all these years, and I found she'd married rich, was sitting pretty in this mansion, while I slaved every day away just to afford the measly rent on my barely legal apartment, I just lost it. I thought, why shouldn't I take something for myself, just this once? I mean, nobody, not even my sister, ever showed me any mercy. It was my turn. Her husband didn't even know about me. I was an embarrassment to her failure of a twin sister. I think I just reminded her of what could have been, the miserable life she could have led if things went just slightly different for her. I spent the following months praying that Ryan would die overseas. I analyzed every last picture in the house. I pored over her diaries. She was so self-absorbed, she wrote down everything that happened to her. The bitch made it so easy to assume her identity that I couldn't believe it took me this long to kill her. I guess the sentimental old cow actually kept a picture of the two of us hidden away. That's what Ryan found, what finally sent him over the edge into attempted murder. I almost feel bad for him, but mostly I'm so infuriated that he couldn't just let me have this one thing for once. Why couldn't he just let me be happy? I was trying so fucking hard. I took care of him day and night. I spent so much time trying to get to know him, but he couldn't be bothered to put in any effort to do the same for me. Hell, I don't even like men, but I was still willing to give him a chance instead of just doing him in right away, like I did to dear old sis. Somehow I still couldn't measure up to my perfect fucking sister, even when I was her. I laugh so hard, my eyes well up with tears and my stomach aches. I reach into a cabinet and retrieve that damn picture. The picture that broke the illusion. I managed to shove it in there as soon as I was finished with Ryan. I push myself up off the floor and walk weakly over to the stove. I flick the burner on and let that damn photograph burn. I gather the ashes of the last hint of my miserable old life in my hands and walk through the beautiful French-style doors into the sprawling and perfectly fucking manicured backyard. I spread the ashes of myself, the self I don't want to be anymore, onto my beloved garden. I smile down at the beautiful bunches of hyacinths bursting up from the fertile ground. It was so kind of me to plant my sister's favorite flowers atop the pieces of her dead body. They told me to bomb the hospital or an orphanage. My choice. I had a ZAG-05 personal rocket launcher and 5 rockets, each of which yielded 5 megatons and provided expedited half-life radioactive decay, allowing for comparatively prompt occupation. In other words, our troops could move in after 6 months, and the residual radiation caused cancer at a rate of only 5%, more than acceptable by Pentagon standards. The ZAG-05 was technically verboten per the Geneva Convention, but they couldn't prosecute rumors. I had volunteered to destroy both targets, but command said no. This was a Nagasaki, Dresden shock and awe gravy op, and one target was gratuitous enough. My unit, Omega Alpha 3, handled bespoke missions, demanding we be fearless, ruthless, and discreet. Ours were precincts of unspeakable valor. My last mission involved annihilating the family of Sergei Matlock, ambassador from the neo-Soviet colony on Mars. Killing him was too on the nose, and we didn't need another martyr for their cause. Better his family perish in traffic, leaving him a dispirited and feckless advocate. I don't like thinking too hard about things. That's one of the reasons I joined the military. Morality, ethics, cost-benefit analyses, no thanks every time. And that's why letting me choose the target was pissing me off. Maybe it was a test. It reminded me of one of the few moral inquiries I'd entertained. Was it better to guard a death camp or kill in one? Was guarding just cowardice or rationalizing self-acquittal? Was it the lesser evil of a terrible choice? Were they equally culpable? Maybe legally, not morally. The world was made by the executioners. The guards just shined their shoes. I just couldn't decide if it mattered to command which target I chose. 6 months ago, things were pretty mundane. A milk run, huh? The major offered a smile I couldn't read, the kind that said either, "I'm a sucker and he can't wait to watch me burn up," or "I hate you, it should be me." Yeah. Command needs a security detail for a quick lunar drop-off. Security services. Typically, transports requiring security went to security services, a special corps composed of personnel subject to frequent and unannounced searches and polygraphs. Personnel shortage and last-minute transport. They did a quick roster check and decided on you. Great. Good news is, you won't be there long enough to need gravity pills. Gravity pills were bone-density mineral supplements designed to offset the skeletal damage caused by long-term exposure to diminished gravity. They tasted like a hermetically sweetened adult diaper, adorning a bloated corpse. Hyperbole, but not by much. You had to take 2 or 3 different antiemetics just to keep them down. Studies cut both ways on short-term diminished gravity exposure, such that there was insufficient evidence, at least for command, to warrant taking them for every visit. The pills cost about $10,000 each, and that was before whatever defense contractor shenanigans inflated the price. Standard 12-hour turnaround. A milk run. A milk run. I tried not to think about why command chose to override sensitive cargo protocols, or why they wanted me involved. Such transfers warranted level 3 security protocols, 3 out of 5 being nuclear weapons. I trusted my questions would be answered at the briefing. Not so. In fact, the briefing made it harder for me not to think about how non-routine it was. Briefing us was General Ching Mantuk, the intelligence officer running the op. He vibed that 1 million people could die, and as long as the cargo was delivered, it was A+ for him. We're using non-traditional transport to protect this mission's secrecy. Security services isn't here because we have intelligence, however sketchy, that they may be compromised. Security services Marines led a vestal virgin existence preserved from most personal attachments. They were unmarried and childless. They trained and dwelled apart from the rest of us to insulate them from espionage or blackmail attempts. Marines completing a 2-year security services assignment enjoyed automatic promotion and assignment to desirable postings, usually in Hawaii or Italy. And like the Vestal Virgins, those betraying us were buried alive publicly to emphasize the gravity of their betrayal. The traitors' graves lined the halls of Security Services HQ, transparent plexiglass providing putrefying admonitions to security service personnel. I imagined that if this adventure went tits up, I'd be similarly rendered, faultless or not. The package, about 1 meter by 15 centimeters by 13 centimeters, was on a table before the general. A titanium chain led to a titanium handcuff around his right wrist, which was anchored to a gauntleted glove on his hand. The chain and cuffs wore a rubberized coating. I waited for someone else to ask the obvious question. What's in the box? Merc obliged. Only 5 people can answer that question, and you aren't one of them. Merc smiled at the answer he'd expected. However, I can tell you about the container enclosing it, or rather, the 3 containers enclosing it. With his free hand, the general dug a coin from a pant pocket and dropped it onto the container. It sparked, sending the coin to the floor. 250 volts, more than enough to kill any human touching it without... He lifted his cuffed hand. Appropriate prophylaxis. We chuckled. Appropriate prophylaxis was the term basic marine training manuals used to describe venereal disease abatement, complete with unsparing photos. With his free hand, the general palmed a remote. A schematic appeared behind him. Protecting the cargo were 3 Russian doll cases. Inside the electrified case was a second of foam cuddling 28-centimeter metal canisters, with jets facing towards the opening of the first. 5 VX nerve gas, 5 hydrogen cyanide, 5 aerosolized hydrochloric acid, and 5 beta-gamma zeta 4. Even Merck kind of blanched at the last one. BGZ-4 topped the Geneva Convention's naughty list, and even though the GC had become more of a suggestion box than a binding legal mandate, BGZ-4 was its best case for enforcement. Aerosolized, it caused the central nervous system to overfire until it electrocuted you from within. While there were no documented deployments against human beings, videos depicting its use against lower mammals commanded on average $300,000 in dark web crush video circles. Inside the foam was a next-gen claymore mine, plastic explosives embedded with explosive ball bearings, a package potent enough to destroy a standard pillbox with 18-centimeter walls. The general smiled. Within that is a titanium sphere 9 centimeters in diameter. It's proof against high-end tactical and low-end strategic nuclear bombs, so the case munitions pose it no risk. Obviously, these defenses target low-information adversaries, up to 100 of them, we estimate. Be assured, however, that if the ship is destroyed en route, the cases will protect the cargo. He drummed his gauntleted fingers against the case. They aren't total proof, however. Hence you guys. We thought about sending more than 3 of you, but figured any more than 3 would draw unwanted attention to a supposedly routine cargo flight. We grew restless. Kinetics like us, combat marines, weren't good at sitting still, at least for long, and we weren't exactly eager to board a ship and sit motionless for 2 more hours. The general noticed. One more thing. For this mission, Protocol 11 is in effect. Merck, Darwish, and I nodded at each other in a show of respect. We estimated the danger we might pose to one another. Protocol 11 was terse and grave, a few bloodless words licensing terrible things. In circumstances authorized by this protocol, relevant personnel may, in furtherance of mission, and with absolute immunity, deprive military personnel, citizens, and non-combatants of all civil rights ensured by the UCMJ or those ordinarily afforded to them by any and all federal or international laws. Protocol 11 didn't intersect with Milk Run in any Venn diagram, even if the mission looked like a milk run, even if I didn't want to think about it, and especially because I couldn't help thinking about it. We took off 30 minutes later. The pilots weren't read in. They thought we were replacing personnel poisoned by spoiled cuttlefish. We had no reason to suspect them. Our kit was impressive. First came a VQ-5 German machine pistol with extended 45-round mags, an alternating flechette and frangible ammo, both promising especially hideous personal ruin. Next were Pinky 89 semi-auto handguns chambered in .357 Magnum armor-piercing rounds, also with extended 21-round mags and ported muzzles to quell recoil. The grenades were a cool bonus, 3 each of high-X, frag and boomboxes, sonic weapons designed to disrupt the autonomic nervous system. We outfitted ourselves discreetly, concealing the weapons under standard-issue light armor jackets. Once the gun buzz faded, we of course speculated about what we were transporting. The consensus? It was prototype weaponry, maybe something cool that opened up a doorway to hell. Then again, Darwish smiled. Then again what? My girlfriend's in Army intelligence. There's a video going around, one the Pentagon has mostly suppressed. He palmed a small data chip and slipped it into the disposable phone that came standard issue in our kit. Some people think it's fake. Really fun, but fake. My girlfriend says the metadata is intact. The video is unmolested. I couldn't resist. I like it when you say unmolested. Darwish tapped the screen. What appeared was like a death camp inside a leper colony, inside infected with tertiary syphilis. Overhead camera security depicted a museum guard holding a ruby sphere in one hand and his sidearm in the other. His expression was unaccountability, retailing homicidal rage. His colleagues, security and administrative types, were obviously trying to reason with him. He replied by shooting them. Bang, a fellow guard's throat explodes. Bang, the Asian collection director's spine shatters. Bang, the community outreach director's head flies, severed below the nose. I didn't know who these people actually were. I just added the descriptions to distinguish among them. I was impressed by the firepower, which forsook second thoughts. Maybe a bit much, perhaps, for a museum security guard. Bullets fired off-screen pulverized the guard, separating him from himself 20 times over. He dropped, and the ruby sphere rolled from his grasp. SWAT officers swarmed him, kicking away his gun. One emptied a mag into the corpse, just to be sure. Another retrieved the sphere, then stopped mid-stride, fugued out. Homicidal mania twisted his face. He pocketed the sphere, then offered his colleagues a full auto surprise, taking out 4 of them. Next came grenades, all he had. A moment later, a shotgun round obliterated his head. Merck and I were impressed. The carnage seemed legit. You don't know if this is real? Darwish nodded. The only thing we know is that the video comes from a security cam at the Miami Metropolitan Museum. Of course, someone could have used the camera to fake a massacre, but why would they? And assuming they knew about it, why would the museum okay it? He then smiled. There's a sequel. He tapped the screen. Security footage from the Miami-Dade Metro Police morgue showed 2 medical examiners and an assistant, gowned and splash-shielded, hovering over a body-bagged cadaver. The tech unzipped the bag. Within was a dead SWAT officer. While the assistant cut off her uniform, one of the MEs withdrew something from the corpse's left pants pocket. It was the sphere. The ME then snagged a scalpel and slashed a smile into the assistant's abdomen. While the assistant bled out on the floor, the ME frenzied the other doctor. He then rose, panting and bloody, sweeping for targets. The video paused. Darwish continued. It took, like, 5 more iterations of this before somebody figured out that holding on to whatever that thing is turned you homicidal. Merck scoffed. So, it's what? Cursed or something? Darwish shrugged. Probably another nerve perv. Nerve perv was slang for weapons that co-opted or disrupted the target's nervous system. I joined in. So who's gonna touch it first? I surveilled the orphanage, then the hospital. I had Wax 99 binoculars, the best. Thermals showed 200 to 300 in the hospital, just under 100 in the orphanage. They stood 2 miles apart. I again wondered if this was some kind of test. Pick one. Maybe they wanted me to show initiative and nix both, to cherry the sundae. If not, which target? Moral economics held that 1 kid equaled a sliding scale of 2 to 6 adults, depending upon the kid's cuteness and the adult's age and infirmity. This wasn't a legal matter, but rather an emotional one. Dead kids, especially murdered kids, provided most people primordial horror and sorrow. Orphan status mitigated this slightly, since people deemed orphans disposable compared with children raised by their natural parents. Sentimental nonsense, all of it, but quite relevant to my calculations. Vaporizing an orphanage, however, created fewer collateral problems than vaporizing a hospital. Orphanages were low maintenance and easily replaceable. Earth, or the United States at least, suffered a massive surplus of social workers, and replacement structures were easily found or built. Hospitals, not so. Doctors and nurses were expensive to replace, and so were hospitals. what with their MRIs and other high-tech accoutrements. And while orphans were worth 2 to 6 adults, doctors were worth 3 to 6 orphans and 5 to 15 adults, in both moral and economic terms. The patients were a mixed bag, but there were a lot of them, and who knows how many would die for want of a hospital. It was all too inky. I thought about a coin toss, but that seemed a bit callous. One of the pilots hailed me. "Admin's calling from Luna 21. They asked for you." I took the call on speaker. "Sergeant?" "Yes." "June Vasquez, Lieutenant Junior Grade, and Luna 21 Base Administrator here." "Go ahead." "Command ordered we advise you of any possible security issue we encounter before and during your visit." "Go ahead." "Our security officers have detained a lab tech on suspicion of espionage. We found some Class 3 propaganda in his quarters after one of his co-workers came to us with ideological fidelity concerns." "Class 3, huh?" Class 3 propaganda materials were arguably a joke. They were legal and readily obtainable among civilians, and comprised little more than pointed criticism of the Pentagon and prevailing political administrations. Normally, a superior officer would confiscate the stuff and tell the offender to not be a bedwetter. But since this was a milk run, but not really, they detained the guy, who probably got the stuff from a commie hooker at Luna Central. "What's your head count there?" 12. 3 scientists, 4 techs, and 5 Marines. And this is the only suspect. So far, we're searching everybody's quarters. Seems like overkill. Command sent us a memo a couple days ago asking for escalated political contraband enforcement. Unlikely coincidence? Okay, keep me apprised. We'll be landing in 20. LJG rang off. Merc, Darwish, and I traded inquiring looks. "Milk run," they chuckled. Merc went first. "This feels like command jitters." Darwish smiled. Ironic. Command is allergic to irony. And to be fair, so was every military organization ever. Irony makes it harder to kill people. "I wonder if they know," Merc followed up. "Know what?" Darwish understood. Protocol 11. Protocol 11 tended to make Marines trigger happy, which tended to make everybody else nervous. Another call came when we landed. It was LJG again, this time more animated. "We've uncovered more propaganda, all Class 3, I sighed. "Who has them?" "Another tech, one of the scientists, and one of the Marines." "But still Class 3, right?" "Correct. Let me guess. Madame Ludmilla deploys the arts of Eastern love to teach clueless if well-meaning GIs about the pitfalls of capitalism. Or something. Pretty much. I actually distrusted anyone confined to a lunar research lab who didn't keep a little contraband around to mitigate the insanity of their circumstances. I therefore pitied the suspects. Wrong place, wrong time. Nobody cares until they have to, and suddenly, they have to. "Do you want to postpone your delivery?" Merc and Darwish together shouted. "No." I nodded agreement. "Confined to quarters. Seek further guidance from command." "Will do, Captain. See you presently." LJG rang off, and Merc, Darwish, and I got going. Merc carried the case in one hand and his Pinky 89 in the other. Darwish and I flanked him, VQ-5s readied. We opened the airlock into the retractable transfer corridor the pilots and base personnel had already secured. 2 Marines, armed with GJK 5.56 and assault carbines, awaited us at the corridor's far end. LJG stood between them, nervous and eager. They waved. We waved back. When we reached the corridor's end, the Marines opened the base hatch for us and gestured for us to enter. When we hesitated, they went first. After that, we reached the clean room in 60 seconds. While we walked to the clean room, LJG excitedly updated us a third time about what he no doubt hoped was an espionage cell in the lab. "We've arrested another one of the Marines." I was unmoved. "Class 3? Class 2? Class 2 contraband was anything evidencing participation in subversive activities, including but not limited to attending the rally of a disfavored political party or corresponding with suspected dissidents. More personal, less theoretical, more inculpatory. Enough for an official reprimand, but not for a court-martial. An anonymous source sent us video of him fraternizing with a Cornell graduate student, notoriously affiliated with neo-Soviet sympathizers. He brandished a tablet and played a video. The early 20s grad student was gorgeous, and probably had a camming side gig, in case teaching postmodern subversive semiotics didn't pan out. "She's hot, I approve." Merck and Darwish chuckled. We reached the lab. At a kiosk in the clean room's antechamber sat Colonel Hades Gomar, reedy, intense, and hairless. He smiled weirdly. We said nothing. He frowned. He then handed us a tablet, and I signed over custody. Merck removed his cuff and gauntlet, while Gomar deactivated the external case's charge from his tablet. Gomar then took the package into an adjacent sterilization chamber. Merck, Darwish, and I lingered to watch. A klaxon sounded. Gomar sealed the sterilization chamber, which one could penetrate with a 10,000-watt, tank-mounted combat laser. He offered another weird smile. LJG pointed a MIQ-45 at us. We traded fire. Our machine pistols splattered him against the lab door. Darwish took one dead center and dropped. Merck went to aid Darwish while I covered the door. It slid open. In rolled 3 frag grenades. I dove behind the admin kiosk. Merck followed, carrying Darwish. We withstood 3 gobsmacking blasts, thanks to the kiosk catching the shrapnel. Then, still disoriented, I sprayed the door with my VQ5 and chased it with 3 boomboxes, trusting that the kiosk would once again shield us from their effects. They created a photoelectric storm, disrupting the overhead lighting and electronics, and disabling 2 Marines, whose choking noises reminded me I wasn't dead. After a moment, I peeked over the kiosk. The doorway was open. I tossed 2 frags through it to thwart any lurking assailants, and again took cover, reloading between the explosions. A voice came into my earpiece. "Captain?" "Yes." "General Manturk." "Sir, I'm told you're under fire." "Yes, sir, but not presently." "Good. I've received intelligence, for your ears only." "Yes, sir. Obviously, your mission is compromised. We've learned a neo-Soviet cell is operating within the lab, and that your team may be involved. We don't know exactly who's involved. We do know that you are not. Accordingly, Command is ordering you to invoke Protocol 11 and to execute everyone in the lab, including Corporal Merck, Private Darwish, and the pilots who flew you there." "Sir," the general continued as if I hadn't questioned him, "you are to spare only Colonel Gomar. We are convinced that he is also innocent of this conspiracy. Act now, Captain." "Sir," I rang off. Merck and Darwish were good. Darwish's armor had stopped the slug. Both looked to me for orders. Instead, I gave them bullets. I then rose, saluted Colonel Gomar, and left the lab pod. 17 minutes later, everybody was dead. I returned to Colonel Gomar, who greeted me eating a cuttlefish burrito from a nearby vending machine. The case remained unopened in the sterilization chamber behind him. He nodded congratulations. "What in hell is going on?" I demanded. It was a test, the whole effing thing. 6 months before, I'd applied to serve in the Omega Alpha Corps. Its missions were ultra-secret, and its pay scale was 150% of standard rank. Less than 1% of applicants got to join. Colonel Gomar was Omega Alpha. He was at the lab to evaluate me. The actual test wasn't delivering the package. It was killing everyone on command, giving no quarter, with no hesitation. Which I did, because thinking was for the higher-ups. The transfer mission was bogus. The case was empty. The cursed ruby or nerve perv, or whatever, never existed. The killing sprees were faked. Omega Alphas, Colonel Gomar explained, can't just be elite warriors. They have to be killers. This means not only that they don't hesitate, but also that they lack regrets. We don't need psyche bills and potentially discoverable session notes. We need untroubled consciences and unsparing operators. You are both. Command created Protocol 11, specifically for Omega Alpha, and it was in force all day, every day for them, for me. I kept scanning the hospital and the orphanage, hoping for inspiration. It was like having to choose between Christmas and my birthday. And then there was a voice in my ear, that of General Manturk. Captain, yes sir, today's your lucky day. Sir, take them both.